The Boys of Dungeon Lane, the new album from Paul McCartney, is a catchy, nostalgic album from the man himself, which actually rocks a little bit harder than I thought it would, reminding me of the best of 70s Wings material. I'm going to break it all down on this edition of Rock Album Review. Hey everybody, it's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the channel. The Boys of Dungeon Lane is the 20th solo studio album from Paul McCartney. It's the follow-up to 2020's McCartney 3. And as you can see, I am a big Beatles fan and Paul McCartney fan. I have been my entire life. Now, Oasis may be my favorite band of all time, but in at number 2, very close to number 1, is the Beatles. And of course, I'm a big Paul McCartney fan and have enjoyed most of his solo material over the years, especially Egypt Station, which came out in 2018. And I also enjoyed McCartney 3 from 2020. And I actually listened to the 2-part McCartney Legacy audiobooks from last year and loved learning more about the Wings years and the solo years. Now, I know the Beatles story back and forth, but it was a cool way to learn more about the McCartney solo years. And of course, Paul McCartney is getting older. He's 83 years old, going on 84. His birthday is coming up in June. Hey, wait a minute. When I'm 84, might be time to do a sequel song. But you know, the thing about Paul McCartney is that he still rocks. He's still out there doing his thing. He may not be able to do that Little Richard roar that he used to back in the day, but you know what? Paul McCartney is still awesome to this very day. And as a huge Beatles fan, of course, I made the pilgrimage to Liverpool about 20 years ago that I went there. It was one of the best trips of my life, and I went to visit a lot of the locations and a lot of the famous places from the early Beatles days. Now, I didn't go to Dungeon Lane, but I did go to places like Penny Lane and Strawberry Field. So I have this little sign that I picked up at the gift shop in Liverpool. So this is really, really cool. And this album, the cover, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, is very similar to this sign. And when it comes to this new album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, I really enjoyed this record. Not to say that Paul's music over the last decade or so hasn't been great, because like I said, I loved Egypt Station, I love McCartney 3, but this album I feel is among some of Paul's best solo material, going back to other 21st century releases like Chaos and Creation in the Backyard and Memory Almost Full. This album to me is on par with those great records. Before we continue, guys, if you like this video, make sure to toss me a thumbs up. I very much appreciate that. And if you like this channel, you like what I'm doing here, and you want to talk more about our favorite bands, make sure to smash the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. All right, let's get back to it. The biggest theme running through this record, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, is nostalgia. Paul is reminiscing about his days growing up in Liverpool. It's right there in the album title. But right from the first track, As You Lie There, with its spoken word vocal intro, to The Days We Left Behind, to Down South, this is Paul looking back fondly on his days as a Liverpool lad. Down South in particular is a song that stands out about Paul's days growing up in Liverpool with John Lennon and George Harrison and eventually Ringo Starr, and how they came up together. Down South, there's a lot of references in that song to the hitchhiking trips that George and Paul used to do when they were teenagers, and then also referencing them sitting on the bus to school where they learned how to play guitar and they first became friends. It also features one of my favorite lyrics on the record, "Good way to get to know you before we learned to twist and shout," which is a nice nod to Paul's early Beatle days. I couldn't help but get emotional listening to the first single, The Days We Left Behind, which has Paul singing very, very tenderly about his past. You can hear the emotion in his voice, and I can imagine that he's feeling nostalgic for a lot of things at his age, and this is an album where he really wants to look back. If you're a Beatles fan, this is the type of song that really brings a tear to the eye, thinking about John Lennon and George Harrison, who are no longer with us. And I still miss them every day, even though I've never met them, but their music has meant so much to me. It feels like a nice extension of a song like Now and Then, which was the reunion Beatles song, the final Beatles song from 2023. It has that same emotional resonance, and Days We Left Behind is an absolutely beautiful track. The Boys of Dungeon Lane was produced by Andrew Watt, who is the go-to producer for a lot of artists these days. He produced the Rolling Stones record Hackney Diamonds in 2023, which I really enjoyed. I believe he produced the new record from the Stones, which is coming out this summer, called Foreign Tongues. And you know what? Paul McCartney, he guest spotted on the last record. He's going to do a guest spot on the new Stones record. So I really enjoyed his work with Andrew Watt, and he also co-wrote a couple of songs with Paul on this record. Talk about a dream. The thing I like about Andrew Watt's production is that he serves the band and artists that he's working with. He doesn't try to change their sound or reinvent the wheel, but he brings out the best in the artists, and I feel like he did that here with Paul, who is really shining on this record. There are some really, really nice tones on this record. I listened to it for the first time in my headphones, and there's some great ear candy on here, which is what you want to hear a little bit from a Paul McCartney record. So it has some really nice fuzzy guitar sounds on there, some harmony guitar solos, which is really, really cool. The drums have a lot of punch, even when Ringo plays them on Home to Us, which is a great track I'll talk about in just a little bit. There's some really nice bass licks on Never Know, which I thought was really sweet. So The Boys of Dungeon Lane is a great record that sounds great too. Paul's songwriting is still top-notch to me. The man has written a lot of classic songs in his career, from Beatles to Wings to his solo work, yet it still feels like he's got a lot to say on tracks like As You Lie There, The Days We Left Behind, Lost Horizon, Come Inside. He still has a knack for writing great melodies, and these songs sit well alongside the McCartney canon. And as I said off the top of this review, I was surprised just how much this album rocks. I expected slower stuff like The Days We Left Behind. It felt like this was going to be a more softer, referential, sentimental record. But you know what? Paul is still really rocking on this new record. One of the vibes I was not expecting to get on this album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, is that it reminds me a lot of Wings, a lot of Ben on the Run vibes happening here, from As You Lie There, which starts out with an acoustic guitar and Paul's spoken word vocal, but then it kicks in with a Ben on the Run style rocking from some fuzz guitar and some great harmony guitar parts. And I didn't really think that Paul could hit the high notes as much as he used to. When you see him play live, he doesn't really get up there as much as he used to, which is fine. The man's 84 years old. We can cut him some slack. But you know what? He really rips it up on this record. On the song As You Lie There, he really, really sounds great. Same goes for Lost Horizon, Mountaintop, which has an epic Wings-style outro to it. I was getting major 70s Wings vibes throughout this record, and it's really nice to hear Paul letting loose. I love hearing Paul McCartney go back up into the higher registers of his voice. He's got one of the best voices of all time, doing his Little Richard thing, doing his Long Tall Sally thing. You know what? He sounds great on here. He may not be able to pull it off live as much as he used to, but on the record, he sounds great. And speaking of the Beatles, Home to Us is an awesome duet between Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. I love to hear it. Every time they get together, it's a gift, and I love hearing them sing about their home in Liverpool. Home to Us is a legitimately catchy and well-done track. Ringo Starr has been keeping very busy as a solo artist as well. In fact, he's been putting out way more music than Paul McCartney. He's put out several albums and EPs over the last couple of years. His new album, Long, Long Road, came out not too long ago, and I just, I think it's awesome that Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr are still giving us new music in their 80s, and it's as awesome as it is. I will say, though, that despite all of the Wing-style rocking that's going on throughout this album, the back half of this record, the last 4 or 5 tracks, are kind of sleepy. Things slow down towards the end of this record, maybe getting a little bit too nostalgic, maybe a little bit too sentimental, if that's even possible. I can see how some people might get tired of that kind of thing. But you know what? Paul's almost 84 years old, so we can't expect him to rock for the whole album. But tracks like Life Can Be Hard, First Star of the Night, Salesman Saint, and the album closer Mama Get By really do slow things down, although I enjoyed Salesman Saint with its trumpet solo at the beginning of the track, and I feel like Paul McCartney is singing about his mom and his dad. His mom died really young, and his dad raised him mainly throughout his life, so I can hear more of that nostalgia about the early days in Liverpool, and I can feel Paul working through some of these memories and emotions on the album. The last few tracks on the record didn't hit me as hard as the first half of the album. I feel like Paul maybe could have cut a couple of songs on here from the 14-song track list, but you know what? He's Paul McCartney. He can do whatever he wants. I also really enjoyed the last song on the record called Mama Gets By. It reminded me of Golden Slumbers from Abbey Road, but also of John Lennon's Imagine. These big piano ballads, they did them the best. Lennon and McCartney, their piano ballads, and it was great, kind of dramatic and cinematic way to end the record. So even though the record was a little bit sleepy towards the end, it was still very enjoyable, and I enjoyed that last track, Mama Gets By. Overall, I really enjoyed the new album from Paul McCartney, The Boys of Dungeon Lane. Paul is getting older, but you can never tell from the rock and roll energy on this album, which is also a very emotional trip down memory lane for both Paul and for us fans as well. I actually listened to this album for the first time while on a walk on a nice sunny day, and it left me smiling from ear to ear. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to give the new album from Paul McCartney, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, a solid 4 out of 5. Favorite tracks for me on The Boys of Dungeon Lane were As You Lie There, Lost Horizon, The Days We Left Behind, Down South, Home to Us, and Salesman Saint. And that is it, guys. That is my rock album review for the new album from Paul McCartney called The Boys of Dungeon Lane. Now it's your turn. Hop into the comments below. Let me know what you thought of the new album from Macca. I really liked it, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, make sure to toss me a thumbs up. I'd very much appreciate that. Make sure to smash the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. And I'll see you guys again for another rock album review here on the channel. Until then, rock on, everybody.